What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. Now, I'm gonna be real, it's been a while, but in this video, I'm gonna be giving you my full review of the Samsung Galaxy A16 5G. Now, this phone was released in October of 2024, so not too terribly long ago. And you can get it factory unlocked for around $200, so in general, it is a pretty affordable phone. Now, if you want a TDLR on this phone, honestly, compared to the A15 5G, it's really not a whole lot different, so if you get either one of them, you're going to have a pretty similar experience. But in case you're new to this phone, I'm going to be going over all the features and what you can really expect if you get it. Now with this phone, we're getting a 6.7-inch 90Hz Super AMOLED display. So definitely a nice looking display here. We're getting a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 385 and a 19.5:9 aspect ratio. So really not bad here. Compared to the A15 5G, as you can see, the phone is quite a bit larger. So if you're consuming a lot of content like watching videos and stuff, the A16 5G will be a pretty nice upgrade, but maybe you're not really on your phone a lot. I know not everyone's watching videos all day and stuff like that. So if you are someone who prefers a slightly smaller phone, then the A15 5G is probably going to be fine. But I want to say the vast majority of people today do tend to prefer larger phones. Let me know if that's you or not. I personally do like having a slightly larger phone just so I can watch YouTube videos, and I feel like browsing the web is a lot more comfortable when you have a bigger screen. But if you're not really using your phone a ton for stuff like that, this might not really be a great thing for you. Because after all, having a larger phone and having to put that in your pocket, especially if you take into account like a case or something, that can be a bit uncomfortable. But I feel like for the vast majority of people, having a larger screen is a nice thing. Now up front, we got a pretty decent looking front-facing camera. On some of the higher end Samsung Galaxy A series phones, we are getting hole punch front-facing cameras, but this is still that little notch here. Now, whether or not that's really important to you, I feel like for the average person looking for a phone like this, it's not gonna be. But if you do want a slightly nicer, more clean, modern look, you might want to go with something like the A55. But in general, I feel like the display here is really good. In case you don't know what a 90Hz refresh rate does, it is going to make the movement on the screen a bit faster and smoother, so that's definitely a nice thing when you're watching videos and stuff like that. And of course, having a 1080p resolution is great all around. So while of course if you compare it to a much higher end phone, those phones typically have a bit more premium designs, and the displays are going to look a bit better. But for a phone like this, I feel like the display is pretty nice. Now for storage with this phone, we are getting 128 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so definitely a decent amount of storage. I remember back in the day with the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, we were getting like 64 or even less. No, I think it was 64, but with this phone, again, we are getting 128. And while if you're really a power user and you put a bunch of stuff on your phone, I know for me personally, I think I have 128 on my personal phone. I honestly don't really even know, but I've never even come close to filling it halfway up. But if you are someone who likes to keep maybe a lot of videos on your phone, there's always stuff like cloud storage. And again, with the A16 5G, we are getting microSD card expansion, so either way when it comes to storage, I feel like the average person is really not going to have any issues. Now for security features with this phone, we are getting Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So as you can see, it does work really well, so no complaints here. And it's pretty much the same as every other phone before it, like the Samsung Galaxy A15 5G, A14 5G, A13. All of them have basically the same design, so nothing's really changed. But I will say there's kind of this little groove right here, and it does feel a bit different. So not really a huge detail or anything, but I feel like it does make the phone a bit easier to hold on to. Now that I think of it, the A15 5G was pretty much the same way, but if you are coming from a phone that has more of a boxy design, just keep in mind this phone has more texture, and honestly, I do feel like it makes it feel a bit nicer. Now, I'm going to demonstrate the fingerprint scanner one more time, so there we go. So real nice. Now for the camera, the selfie camera is 13 megapixels, so pretty standard for a more entry-level phone. And then on the rear, we do have a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. So we pretty much have all the camera features you would typically find on a phone like this. The 50 megapixel camera is gonna give you a real nice image. The ultra wide camera is great for taking pictures of like scenery, sunsets, group photos, things like that. Definitely a nice feature to have. And then with the macro camera, you can get those nice close-up detailed images. So in general, if you are looking for a phone that has a decent amount of camera features, the A16 5G will be a great choice. Now, keep in mind for video, we do have a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras. And while for me personally, I feel like this is perfectly fine, I used to think being able to record in 4K was honestly a lot more important than it ended up being. It is a nice feature on paper, but I feel like in real life, people are really not going around recording a ton of 4K videos. So on one hand, of course, if that is a feature that you want, you are going to want to look for a slightly higher end device than this, but I feel like for the average person, the way most people are using their phones to record videos, 1080p will be perfectly fine. I mean, even for content creators, the average person who's consuming content is typically not going out of their way to put everything in 4K. I don't know about you, but when I watch YouTube, I usually watch it in whatever resolution things automatically pull up in. So bottom line is, of course, if you really want that 4K capability, then you might be disappointed here, but in general, I feel like, again, for most people, recording in 1080p is perfectly fine. Now, when it comes to RAM and processor, with this phone, we are getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 6300 processor. Now, overall, as I've been using this phone, I haven't had any performance issues, and for being an entry-level smartphone you can get for $200 or less, I would say the performance is pretty good. Now, of course, if you're doing a bunch of super intense mobile gaming, which some people might be into that, but I feel like playing on a mobile device is not really ideal anyway. But if you are doing that kind of thing, then of course, there are much better phones out there for that. But for the average user, if you're doing stuff like browsing the web, using social media, watching videos, and even playing a basic game like Candy Crush, I do think it will be plenty good enough. In most people getting this phone, especially those of you who really know what you're getting into, you're probably not going to have a bad experience. And even when compared to a bunch of other phones, even higher end ones, I feel like the A16 5G is really not slow. At this point in 2025, sure, obviously there are things like the iPhone 16 and the Samsung Galaxy S25 and all that. Those phones are going to be significantly faster, but if you are just looking for a decently fast phone for basic daily activities, a phone like this is going to get the job done perfectly fine. Now, I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So as you can see, we are getting a single core score of 976 and a multi-core score of 2167. So what I recommend doing, of course, is comparing these scores to your current phone, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone will be an upgrade for you. Now, Geekbench scores aside, I've seen phones with much lower scores than this do perfectly fine for normal activities that you would typically expect a phone like this to do. So again, if performance is really your number one priority and you want a super fast, higher level phone with a powerful processor for stuff like intense mobile gaming and video editing, maybe you're using CapCut constantly, which funny enough, I do actually have CapCut on this phone, so I can tell you from experience, video editing does work perfectly fine here. So yeah, the bottom line is, again, for most people, I do think you will get by perfectly fine here. But if you are looking for like the fastest phone ever, then obviously you're gonna want to get something a bit higher end than a $200 phone. But yeah, again, performance wise, in my opinion, it's pretty much exactly what you would expect. So I really have no complaints here. Now for the battery, with the Samsung Galaxy A16 5G, we are getting a 5000 milliamp hour battery. This supports 25 watt fast charging. And unfortunately, we are not getting wireless charging here, which I feel like if you've never had it, then this is probably going to be basically meaningless. But if you are coming from wireless charging, or I should say a phone that has wireless charging, then this might be a little disappointing. I mean, I know for me personally, I have an iPhone 15 Pro Max and I use my wireless charger almost exclusively. So if you are coming from that kind of situation, then again, keep in mind this phone does not have wireless charging. Now, at this point in 2025, if you haven't gotten a phone for a while, you might be expecting every smartphone to have it, but unfortunately that's really not the case. But aside from that, again, we are getting a 5000 milliamp hour battery here, so definitely a large battery. And in my experience, the battery life is really good. So if you are someone who's maybe traveling a lot, maybe for work you're not near a charger, or whatever the case may be where battery life is super important to you, then a phone like this is going to be a great choice. Now, I will say if you're coming from like a Samsung Galaxy A14 5G or even the A13 if I can remember right, you're probably still really not going to be surprised here. I think every Samsung Galaxy A series that's made now has this same size battery. But if you are coming from a lower end device that maybe has like an LCD type display or a standard 60 Hz refresh rate, keep in mind even if that phone has a 5000 milliamp hour battery too, them being the same size doesn't necessarily mean the battery life is going to be exactly the same. Because on one hand, while this phone is really efficient power wise, and again, in my experience, the battery life is really good. Having something like a Super AMOLED display, a higher refresh rate, and a decently powerful processor that does support 5G connectivity, that stuff will drain the battery a little bit faster than, say, a low-end Motorola phone, for example, that has an LCD display. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind. But in general, if you are looking for a phone that has the features that this phone has, like again, a really high quality display, a fast processor, and 5G connectivity, but you do want really good battery life too, then in that case, the A16 5G will be a great choice. And again, it does support 25 watt fast charging, which I will tell you from experience, with the right charger, it does charge really fast. But keep in mind, to really get the full advantage here, you will need a 25 watt fast charger, so if you have just a regular charging block, you might want to upgrade if you really care about charging speed. But if you already have one, you probably already know what's going on. But yeah, in general, if the battery is important to you, you're really not going to go wrong with this phone. Now for the software, we are getting Android 14, and Samsungs do have really good software support. So you can also expect to get Android 15, 16, 17, and I think 18 too. So if you are someone who likes to have the latest software, this will be a good choice for you. And if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer period of time, while also having the latest software, then again, the A16 5G or really any new Samsung A series phone, they're all going to be great. Samsung has some of the best software support on the market, so you're really not going to go wrong here. As far as other features go, this phone does have IP68 dust and water resistance, so up to 1.5 meters for 30 minutes. And it does have NFC too, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments, then keep in mind you can do that with this phone, so no problem there. But in conclusion, my overall thoughts on the Samsung Galaxy A16 5G. Now, on one hand, you really can't go wrong with it. I mean, if you're looking for a phone for $200 or less, I got this phone at Best Buy for like $199 plus tax. And if you're getting it from a carrier, then you're probably going to pay a lot less than that. And sure, if you want like a $50 track phone, then this might seem a little bit more expensive, but in general, for what it is, you're pretty much getting all the features you could possibly expect. I mean, it has a decently fast processor, so there's really not a whole lot at this point that this phone can't do. It also has a nice camera that can take pretty good photos. It has a really good display for consuming content, and a large battery as well. So if you are looking for a 5G phone for basic daily activities, I do think the A16 5G is a great choice. Now, that being said, if you're comparing it to the A15 5G or even the A14 5G, that might be kind of a hot take, but I feel like from that phone to this phone, sure, there are some cosmetic differences, but in general, I feel like the only real difference here is the display. Sure, the processor may have gotten a little bit faster over the years, and the camera probably got a little bit better too. I don't think the A14 5G actually had an ultra-wide camera. That came with the A15 5G. But the bottom line here is, if you have maybe the A15 5G and you're looking at upgrading, I probably wouldn't. I mean, sure, if you really want the 6.7-inch display, then a case could be made for that. But overall, you're probably going to get basically the same experience. And if you have neither of these phones, maybe you're coming from a much lower end device and you're considering this phone or the A15 5G. If it were me personally, I would probably go for whatever the best deal is, because I mean, yeah, you are going to see the difference between a 6.7-inch display and a 6.5-inch display, but it's not really going to be huge, at least not in my opinion. Now, if you're constantly on your phone doing all kinds of stuff, then yeah, maybe. But other than that, I feel like it's really not worth like spending double the price or anything like that. But aside from that, I feel like if you're not looking at upgrading from the A15 5G to the A16 5G, and you're really just objectively looking for a decent entry-level 5G phone, then again, you're not going to go wrong with the Samsung Galaxy A16 5G. But that's it for this video. Hopefully you guys found it helpful, and I will see you in the next one.